This episode is sponsored by Echo. Hear clearly, care confidently.
Learn more at echohealth.com. That's EKO health.com. And use code JSP for $50 off any stethoscope.
Just Some Podcast Media.
The thoughts and opinions on Just Some Podcast are of the hosts and guests and do not represent the views of organizations that employ them or they volunteer for. They are also not responsible for spontaneous black holes or nuclear wars that may occur. You have been warned.
Welcome everybody to another fun-filled and exciting episode of Just Some Podcast. This is Tom.
Hey, this is Ben. And Tom, thanks for letting me out of the closet.
You are welcome, sir. I forgot about that. You were in there for quite a while.
4 or 5 days.
4 or 5 days minimum. Yeah.
Unfortunately, when we get to our main topic, I was not able to attend the interview because I had previous engagements. And so Tom locked me in the closet, apparently.
I have found it is really entertaining for me when Ben is not available or there on a show with me, like if I'm the guest or something, to come up with wildly outrageous lies about why he wasn't able to attend, and an attempt to really embarrass him and make him laugh a little bit when he hears it. So, and I never tell him. He just hears the podcast and then hears a million people talking about why he was trying to sell pygmy zebras in Australia or something like that. And he's like, what? So it's always a fun time for Ben to find out why he wasn't on the show. But how are things in your neck of the woods, Ben?
Not too bad. We're doing a lot of back to school physicals, sports physicals, all that good stuff, getting these kids ready to go back to school next week. I, as a parent, am counting down the days until my children go back to school, because then it gets back into a normalcy of routine that I can't wait for.
I agree. The only thing here is, it's hot. I mean, it's not Kansas hot, but it's hot.
Lately, it's been nice. The last 3 or 4 days, we're down in like the 80s.
Yeah. Okay. But that's what I'm saying is here we got into the low 90s and I'm like, oh my God, I'm dying. So it's been warm, nothing too bad, but it's been really good. Same, just busy. Everyone's getting ready to go back to school. And we have had a few cases of monkeypox in this area. And I do mean by area, I mean a large swath, like nothing remotely close. But hearing it on the horizon makes me go, oh boy, here we go. Like another viral infection for everybody to argue about that doesn't need argument. You either have it or you don't. You either protect yourself or you don't. It's really pretty easy, but just preparing myself mentally for that set of hoops to start jumping through.
I understand, yes. So, Tom, before we get into our story, I had a drug rep come in this week, and he posed an interesting question to me, and I want to pose it to you and to our listeners to see what their thoughts are.
I know the question. I bet I know what it is.
Okay, what is it?
Let's hear it first, and I'll tell you if it was or it wasn't.
I'm betting it probably is not. The question that he posed was, why is COPD undertreated as opposed to like something like diabetes and hypertension? And I gave him a few answers. And so I'm just I want your thoughts on this. And I'll tell you my answers if you'd like me to, while you're formulating thoughts.
I would assume COPD is because the initial onset of symptoms can be pretty minor or go under treated because they're not readily acknowledged or accepted as COPD. They're like, oh, well, you're just out of shape. You know, you need to start running more, quit smoking, which, by the way, they should have done a long time ago if, in fact, they have COPD because of smoking. But yeah, that's why I would think.
So the answers that I gave him, and that's kind of similar to what I had said. My first answer was something with diabetes, hypertension, things like that. I have tangible proof that what we are doing is helping. Whereas with COPD, I don't have a special test that I can do. I mean, I had the spirometry, but we're not going to order spirometry on everybody. So there's nothing tangible with it, was my first answer. I then said, well, I think some of it is because while diabetes and hypertension may be self-inflicted with obesity, I feel like there's a stigma with COPD because the vast majority is going to come from smoking or exposure along those lines, that it almost feels self-inflicted. And so there's almost like an embarrassment, or not an embarrassment, but a well, I did this to myself, so I just
have to deal with it. I made
because-
my bed. I lay in it.
Yeah. I mean, I just thought it was an interesting question, and so I thought I wanted to pose it to you.
So what'd he say?
He didn't have an answer. He was actually, I mean, he was legitimately asking me like my thoughts on.
Oh, I thought you meant like this was the drug rep version of now you see me, now you don't. Like, cha-cha. Now he's got some kind of cool answer to sell his drug. And I was like, okay, well, what's the answer?
No, he was just legit asking. He's like, why do you feel like, what are your thoughts on why this is undertreated? And that,
Well, and that's the same reason I feel diabetes is undertreated and hypertension is because initially they don't see it. Now, granted, like you just said, treatment can provide some tangible evidence if they choose to. Oh God, I even can't believe I have to say this nowadays. If they choose to believe the science that they're looking at, which some people don't. Ugh. But the point is, usually in the beginning, a new diabetic's like, well, I was just peeing a lot. I didn't think about having diabetes, or I was hungry a lot. I didn't think about having diabetes or hypertension. I just had a bunch of headaches. I didn't think so I think all of these disease processes in the beginning can be the silent killers that we call them. And that's why. And I don't think COPD falls out of that range. I just think COPD can be sneakier because eventually, diabetes is going to catch up or hypertension is going to catch up and you're not going to be able to hide from it. By the time you're in late stage COPD, you've told yourself a million excuses and they all seem plausible. I had bronchitis. My doctor said I got bronchitis. I get it every year. And for some reason, everybody thinks I get the same thing every year on a schedule. And I try and tell them they don't, but that's the type of thing that they do. And so that's why I would think.
Interesting. All right. Well, I said I want to turn over to our listeners. What do you think? Or do you think it is? Maybe we're wrong and we are just vastly undertreating COPD in our particular areas, although I don't think that's necessarily it.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see those answers. I think you're just a terrible NP. I'm like, well, touche. So there you go. So,
all right, Tom, let's jump into our story that you may have missed. And you did not miss this one because you actually sent it to me.
Yeah.
So
what do you know? Every once in a while, Ben, every once in a while, you got to get up pretty late to compete with that because I'm terrible at sending you stuff. So yeah.
Okay. So story you may have missed. Ohio judge rules that Walmart, CVS, and Walgreens must pay a combined $650 million for damages related to the opioid crisis. U.S. District Judge Dan Aaron Polster ruled that over the next 15 years, approximately $306 million must be paid to Lake County, and approximately $344 million must be paid to Trumbull County. All three companies were found liable for their role in the opioid epidemic in these counties last November. And the lawsuit, which was initially filed in 2018, was part of the federal multi-district litigation created to address the manifold claims against opioid manufacturers and distributors. The counties allege that the pharmacies, quote, abused their position of trust and responsibility, unquote, as registered dispensers of controlled drugs, and in doing so, quote, fostered a black market for prescription opioids, unquote. Tom, I know you and I have talked about a little bit about this, but what are your thoughts?
To be completely fair, this is one of those times where I have not read enough information to have fully formed an opinion on this specific case.
Fair enough.
But since people are listening to this, and that's the entire reason they chimed in was to hear my opinion about this, here's what I do think based off what I've seen so far is, first of all, I don't like it. I mean, I'm anti-opioid, and honestly, I live in Ohio. That's what I've been saying since we did those episodes, a couple of years ago, is I have seen, witnessed, and felt the impact of the opioid crisis. What I don't like about this particular case, and again, there might be some legal reasons, that they were the prime, plaintiffs or defendants, I should say, in this case. But if there was a specific pharmacist that was, filling way too many scripts or something like that, and they went after that pharmacist, I'd be good with it. But to say that an organization, and one as large as those three are, to say each one of them is somehow individually responsible to track, monitor, and do the job that really the provider should have been doing, and say, now you are responsible to do their job plus your job, I just think is a very bad precedent to set. And I really don't understand how they were held liable. Like I said, this may be a case where there are specific legal issues that were factored into this. And then, okay, then they're fair game. But on the surface, it looks like they're kind of getting thrown into the ring with the opiate manufacturers and the pill mills that were dispensing them.
Well, and I think it's also the big pockets. That's my personal thought, and that's maybe inappropriate, but I mean, that's my personal thought is let's go after, we're not going after the mom and pop pharmacy.
Yeah, we're going after Walgreens. Yeah. I've seen that, actually. I think CVS or Walmart's lawyers said that. And honestly, I would say they're right. However, and I've had to use the word however 6 times so far, so let's stop that. But what I would say is the lawyers are mad that the other lawyers did the lawyer tricks that they set up and now used against them.
Well, Tom, you're right. Spokespersons for Walmart, CVS, and Walgreens all said they plan to appeal the ruling. Walgreens says, quote, "The facts and the law do not support the jury verdict last fall and do not support the court's decision now. As we have said throughout the process, we never manufactured or marketed opioids, nor did we distribute them to pill mills or internet pharmacies that fueled this crisis." Walmart released a statement saying, quote, that the plaintiffs in this case sued Walmart in search of deep pockets, unquote, and claimed that, quote, the trial was engineered to favor the plaintiffs' attorneys and was riddled with remarkable legal and factual mistakes. They went on to say that instead of addressing the real cause of the opioid crisis, like pill mill doctors, illegal drugs, and regulators asleep at the switch, plaintiffs' lawyers wrongly claim that the pharmacists must second-guess doctors in a way that the law never intended, and many federal and state health regulators says interferes with doctor-patient relationships. And CVS said that ruling is a misapplication of the law, says, quote, "We strongly disagree with the court's decision regarding the county's abatement plan, as well as last fall's underlying verdict. Pharmacists fill legal prescriptions written by DEA-licensed doctors who prescribe legal FDA-approved substances to treat actual patients in need," unquote. So that's their take on it.
Well, first, I'm always right. So I don't know why you even had to say that. Second of all, again, the part of this I am being highly amused about was hearing all these lawyers bitch about the other lawyers doing the lawyer things. It's like, wait a second. Maybe what you should be talking about, instead of starting to point the finger at regulators, which I hate after all the stories we've done, I hate anytime someone brings up state or federal Congress. And why aren't they doing something about this? Because they're morons. Okay. Every story we have, almost every story we have done with a state representative or a U.S. House of Representatives, senator, whatever, they're morons. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They should have nothing to do with what we're doing. And if they are involved in laws, then they should only be doing it at the behest or advice of a committee of nothing but providers that have been appointed. Having said all that, sucks to suck, CVS, Walmart, Walgreens. I don't know what to tell you. I agree that I think that this was wrong, but it sounds to me like a jury didn't. And yeah,
we'll see what the appeal show. But that was our story.
I can't wait to see what the appeal is, because I agree with them on this. Sounds like a lot of legal twisting, but then also, like I said, it cracks me up because I'm like, oh, the lawyers are mad that they got out lawyered. So that's really what's pissing them off.
Well, speaking of lawyers, Tom, on the other side of our break, you actually got to sit down and have an interview with a lawyer.
Oh my God. I was going to say, I literally forgot that's what the rest of the story was about. So yeah, that's great. Again, I didn't say anything bad about lawyers, Mike. I said something bad about regulators. Okay. So if you're a congressman too, I'm really sorry. And I will apologize to you, but yeah, the rest of them suck. So yeah, Tom did get a chance to sit down and visit with Mike, who's an attorney at the Chapman Law Group, about prescribing opioids and how we can effectively do that with as PAs and NPs. So, Tom, anything you want to say before we take a break and throw to the interview? A lot of good information. It was also, and we're going to say this during the episode, but I would tell you again right now. First of all, each state's slightly different on certain things. So make sure you know your individual and specific state laws and regulations and your hospital policies and procedures. Those are all key factors in all this. Okay. So just because you heard this and you can't go anywhere and say, well, Mike and Tom said, that's not going to hold water. This is more like a guideline, like some helpful information that you should remember while you're doing charts or talking to people. He's a great guy. there you go. I thought it was a really good interview. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you learned something. And yeah, I hope we talk to him again soon.
Tom, how's that Lippmann 3M Core Digital Stethoscope treating you?
It is fantastic. I, again, led a student. It wasn't even my student. It was like a student was tagging along with me for a little bit and just let them use it. And in that short period of time, they've already texted me and said, how do I get one of those? So again, the proof has always been in the pudding for me. And if you put this thing on and you hear it and the difference it makes, I really don't think there's any comparison.
I would agree with you. It's amazing. One of the things that I like, and I don't know if maybe in my truck, because I had to do some work at another clinic, if something got bumped on my Echo or whatever, but I just didn't have as crisp and loud a sound as I needed. It has the little volume buttons right on it, right there on your stethoscope. So just an easy bump up a couple of notches, and I was right back to where I needed to be, hearing heart sounds. I love the noise cancellation, 40-time amplification. It truly is a wonderful piece of equipment that once you use it once, you're going to want to use it every single time. If you want to find out more, go to echohealth.com. It's ekohealth.com. Use code JSP. It gives you $50 off your order and let them know that we sent you.
I want to talk about our next sponsor, especially for just a second. And I didn't tell you, so that's why he's got a worried look on his face, if you guys could just see it. So as we talked about at the beginning of the show, and I'm not going to beat a dead horse, I got the pretty significant eye injury, and what came along with that is I cannot take anything, no NSAIDs for pain. And as we've talked about on the show, we did a whole episode, I have gout. Well, because I wasn't having a good enough time not being able to see out of my left eye and still dealing with I may lose it. Like, people don't seem to realize the first couple of weeks, it was still, hey, you could still lose your eye, like not just your vision. We could take your eyeball out of your head. And so I was a little freaked out, and bleeding was a significant problem, and I could not take NSAIDs. And as I just alluded to, I have gout. So let's put 2 and 2 together. I got a gout flare up. What's the number one thing you take for a gout flare up, Ben? NSAIDs.
Yes.
So here I am in excruciating pain, and I cannot take any NSAIDs. And I was waiting to get a hold of someone, because the next thing is steroids that I could take. The only thing I had for about 24 hours was CBD stat products. And I just want to say, specifically from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Now, was I still in a lot of pain? Yes. But the ability to bear the amount of pain I was in, I truly believe was significantly, contributed to by CBD stat. Like, their products really helped me bridge that gap. And so from a heartfelt thank you from the bottom of my heart, I knew I wanted to do this on the show and just say thank you to your company. And Ben's going to tell you the important stuff, but really it meant a lot to me to and I know I say this stuff all the time, but I'm telling you, I just went through this. And and if you've never had gout, I try and tell people is every time you take a step, hit your affected area with a hammer as hard as you can. So let's say you think it's your big toe, hit your hammer, bam, crush your big toe. Now take a step, do it again. That's what gout feels like. And so to be able to actually be able to sit down and not cry from being in pain was significant. So thank you, CBD stat.
Well, I don't really got nothing else to say other than I'm going to give you all the information that you need for it. So if you're in healthcare, they love their healthcare people. They're going to give you a permanent 40% discount. That's a permanent 40% off. You just go to cbdstat.care/healthcare. You fill that form out, and they're going to give you that 40% discount permanently. But they know that some of our listeners are not in healthcare, and they want to help you out too, just because you listen to our voices. So you go to cbdstat.care, put everything in your shop cart that you need. You go to the checkout, you put in code JSP20. That's JSP20. They're going to give you 20% off just because you're listening to our voice right now. That is cbdstat.care.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome to tonight's show, and we are going to be interviewing Mike Staples. He is a very special guest of the show. And, well, Mr. Staples, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know what we're going to be talking about tonight?
Sure, Tom. Be glad to. My name is Michael Staples. I work with the Chapman Consulting Company. We're a national healthcare compliance organization. And tonight we're going to be talking about prescribing in general, specifically nurse practitioner, physician assistant prescribing. But we're going to be really focused on the controlled substances and making sure that your license, your career is protected when you do prescribe those controlled substances.
Yeah. And as an educational, or we try and be educational healthcare podcast, this is something that's really near and dear to both Ben and I's heart. You guys are going to notice out there that are listening that the melodious voice of Ben is suspiciously absent from this interview. And that's okay. I locked him in a closet. He backmouthed me. You got to be dominant. And I had to show him who was really running the pack here. So he's not here, and there's nothing he could say about it because, he's not here. So Mr. Staples and I had a great conversation pre-show. He's got an awesome background. And if you are listening to this and you're a healthcare provider, you're going to learn a lot. And even if you think I don't need to know that, I guarantee you that when an expert comes on the show to talk about things that you need to know about fine details or some, very helpful suggestions, it would behoove you to listen to this. So first thing we want to talk about, we talked about the big thing and controlled substances. Now, Ben and I have mentioned this on the show. I'm in Ohio, where controlled substances are a big topic for providers. So what are some of the big things, not only in prescribing, but in documentation, that are huge pitfalls that you see a lot that are easily avoidable? Like, what are some big things that we can just start off right off the bat? Don't do this.
The first thing is, Tom, is non-personalized medical records, especially when it comes to controlled substances. When you're going to prescribe a controlled substance or prescribe a durable medical equipment device, or even do a procedure, you need specific personalized data in that chart specific to that patient. So if a patient comes in and broke his, and I'm just going to use generic terms, broke his back from a sledding incident at Perfect North Slopes in Indiana, or snow tubing incident, whatever. Then
that's oddly specific.
Yeah, then that needs to be in the chart, Okay. So in return, you make a diagnosis, whatever your diagnosis is, broken back, sprain, whatever, and you decide to use a controlled substance, the first thing you're going to do is make sure that you're documenting that he's tried over-the-counter products, he's tried alternatives. So, so if he tells you, listen, I've ate ibuprofen every day for a week and it's tearing up my stomach and it's not giving me any pain relief, then you want to document that, the patient has been, eating ibuprofen every night by the handful and, now complains of stomach issues, et cetera, before you even get into the controlled substance. The biggest mistake people make is a lack of documentation. They just rush to get through the patient.
So one of the things I remember I've always been told, and I still stick to it now, is I try and avoid subjective from the patient when they're like, it only hurts a little. Like I usually put patient reports pain. Should we be putting, outside of quotes for very specific incidences, should we be putting the patient's reporting mild pain, or should we just put patient reports pain? Because I was always told I can't tell your scale, so I shouldn't be putting mild, but I can put pain.
I think it's because pain's so subjective and everyone has a different tolerance of pain. I think you need to put down exactly what the patient is telling you. Okay. Because, and even the pain scales are helpful, as far as, there's a lot of government experts out there that'll say if a opiate is not giving a patient at least 30% pain relief, then it's a failed opiate. It's a failed opiate trial. So, if you got a patient that's coming in every visit saying, I've got a 10 out of 10 pain, and you've got them on, Oxy 15s, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, and they're saying their pain's 10 out of 10, number one, you should be doing a little bit of clarification, addressing the patient, because a lot of times it's just an educational thing. And a lot of patients think that if they don't tell you they're in extreme pain, they won't get the medication that they need to function. So you kind of got to educate that patient and say, we know the worst time possible, your pain's a 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. But when I give you this medicine and you take this medicine, about an hour after you take this medicine, what is your pain level? And most of the time, you're going to hear them say 5 or 4 once they're educated. And that's something you're going to have to document in the charts as well. You have to show that the medication is working for it to be valid. You have to show that there is a greater than a 30% decrease in their pain. Because if they're not, then, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just basing it off of my experience with compliance and reviewing thousands of charts and testifying in court, on standards of care, administrative hearings with the medical board when I used to be a medical board investigator. You have to be able to show that the medication is working. And if it's not giving them 30% relief, then, you need to try something else, whether that's an opiate rotation, a different treatment, et cetera.
So first of all, you brought up something very good. You're not a medical provider, and that's good to clarify. However, again, for the people listening, he is an expert in his field. Okay. So while he is not a provider, again, this is one of those cases where somebody does not have to be a medical provider to give us expert opinions on how to do our job. So again, while I'm glad you clarified, this is one of those cases where, but you are an expert at what you do. So I'm hoping that they're listening to it.
Yeah. It's, and I give advice to keep people out of trouble. That's, doctors, nurse practitioners, and PAs, they take care of us. So I try to take care of them.
Well, something else you said, though, I want to make sure I'm very clear, and nobody has to do anything ever any certain way. But for instance, like if you have a traumatic orthopedic injury, I tend to follow like Ottawa rules. OK, so, can the person bear weight? Can they, move the joint? Can they articulate? Is there redness? Is there swelling? Blah, blah, blah. Right. Okay, so my point is, when we are dealing with a controlled substance, are there specific things that, besides the pain scale and the effectiveness of the medication, which, let's be fair, they should have been documenting anyways, but let's say they weren't, they learned something great. Are there other things that we need to make sure that we are documenting when we are either we're thinking about prescribing for a first-time pain medications, or this is a patient with chronic pain and we're keeping them on them? What are there rules that we should be following for that?
Well, number one, you need to make sure that you're documenting function or lack thereof, and activities of daily living and lack thereof, when it comes to prescribing. Because ultimately, that's why you're going to prescribe a controlled substance, because they can't do something. Because of their pain, they can't work. Because of their pain, they can't help their grandkids. Because of their pain, they can't sleep at night. They can't function or do activities of daily living. They can't take a shower because they have so much pain. They can't get on the ladder to paint. It's very important that you're very specific in the medical records when you're talking about function and activities of daily living, that you take what the patient says and transcribe that to the medical record to show a very specific incident, because it's very hard for a government expert or even a malpractice, attorney to get on the stand and attack something that's patient specific. Anybody can say patient has pain and he can't function. Patient has pain, can't do activities of daily living. Well, when you get on the stand as a prescriber and they start attacking you for this, are you really going to remember this patient out of your other 2,000 patients? So when they say, Doc, what function couldn't they do? What activities of daily living could they not do? And you're up there going, they're going to assume you're guilty of drug trafficking, that you just wrote that down to cover your tail. But if you specifically say, Rob works as a painter, hurt his back without the hydrocodone, 5-325s twice a day, he cannot function as a painter. That's a lot harder, easier to defend.
Well, it is. And honestly, I won't go into the whole story because it's not completely germane to this, but I specifically, as a rookie police officer on the stand, remembered something about my first armed robbery case, but I didn't put in the report. But I mean, I vividly I remembered that detail. And I will assure everybody that is listening to this, the attorney for the defendant made sure everybody knew that information was not in the report. And how did I remember it? And while Mr. Staples here is explaining this in a very nice tone, it is ass wrecking to be on a stand in front of a jury trying to explain why you don't think you're a moron to this jury. So please avoid that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if it's not in the record, they're going to say it didn't happen.
Yeah. That's always going to be the go-to, is if it's not in the record, it didn't happen. So that brings up an interesting point then. What are some things, again, I don't know how to word this, but are there things we should be not? Like, are there things that people tend to document that get them into trouble that are extraneous, that they are not needed? Like, are there things that we should avoid documenting that can actually cause a problem?
Unless you're doing something improper or wrong,
okay.
There's not really anything that, I've personally seen in a chart, And I will tell you this, I have seen, doctors write that, patient's currently my girlfriend, and that'll get you in trouble.
That'll cause a problem. Yes.
so yeah, you definitely don't want to do that. Or a patient gave me back 5 pills for my back pain. I kid you not. I kid you not. These are things that, I've seen as an investigator. I've seen doctors talking about their sexual relationship with a patient, which is illegal in every state, to prescribe to someone you're having a sexual relationship with.
Yeah.
Besides the common sense things, that's basically criminal admissions, I don't think you can document too much.
Okay.
But the thing is, your notes should have all the basics. And I've skipped a lot of basics because I know your listeners are, educated, you got to have good vitals. You got to, like I said earlier, you got to show that they've tried alternatives, and if they tell you that they've been to physical therapy 3 times and, it just always makes their pain worse. Because I'll be honest with you, like I've had numerous knee surgeries, and every time I went to physical therapy, my knees got worse. Like it's never gotten better by me going to physical therapy. Never, No
matter what that orthopedic surgeon told you. It wasn't true.
And I'm telling you right now, if I had another knee surgery and they're like, you need therapy, I would not go. Does that make me a drug diverter? No. But but based on my experience, I've never had a good outcome with physical therapy. So I think we need to document everything the patient says. And, it's really about covering your tail, and covering your license, when you document this stuff. But you have to be personalized, and you have to, have a compliance plan in place. The Affordable Care Act, mandated compliance plans, and hardly any healthcare provider has it. And compliance plans, basically, you have a compliance committee at the office, compliance officer, and it's just somebody to be an extra ears and eyes to look over your charts and look over any complaints or any prescribing. And really, that helps if you're going to prescribe controlled substances. I would strongly recommend you have a compliance plan. You can set these up yourself, or you could, hire someone like myself to come in and train the staff and do it. But you can also do it yourself. I mean, it's not extremely hard, but it is something that, requires some work, to get set up.
So is there any differences in advice? And I can't imagine there are, but we'll cover this because we do go around the country, and some states have independent practice and some states have supervising authorities. Like where I'm at, I have to have a physician that I talk to, I sit there, charge to for review. My question then is basically, when we have to add that level of supervision in there, which I'm not opposed to, does that change any of our calculus as far as things we need to be aware of in documentation? Like I do speak to my supervising authority about, these cases if I did, or is that something that's really not necessary because it's already clear we have a supervising authority? Or should I document that we spoke to another provider?
In states that require supervision, most states are collaborations now.
Yeah.
But
I guess I should say that it is a collaborating, but it still says supervising, collaborating authority. So I'm like, okay.
But the important thing is to make sure that, in the collaboration agreement, it's spelled out that, you can treat pain, you can prescribe controlled substances as long as it's in accordance with the rules and the laws of the state, because not every state allows it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I don't mean specifically like the contract. I do know what you mean. What I'm saying is, like, let's say I speak to Dr. B about this patient's pain, and Dr. B says, well, I wouldn't start at tramadol. I would start with ibuprofen. Is that like the type of conversation that should be recorded somewhere in the treatment, or is that extraneous? Like they don't need to know that other supervising authority was involved in this patient's plan of care?
If you went to that supervising or collaborative authority to get advice on what to prescribe, and they state that, then I think that's pertinent information that needs to be in the chart. If you went and talked to the collaborating physician afterwards and he says, look, next time I probably would just gave ibuprofen and tried that first, then, obviously that would be something that should be, peer review, set up a peer review at your office to kind of protect that from getting out. But that would be something that, you would discuss privately with the physician.
Okay. Yeah. Well, again, this is just one of those, some states aren't going to have that issue and some states are. So I'm just trying to cover all that for.
It's, Ohio's, is pretty, pretty flexible with MPs and PAs, but you go to Kentucky and it's a whole different ballgame.
And I guess maybe I should have prefaced everything we're going to say is not every state's going to be the same. So when Ben and I talk about Kansas or Ohio, certainly, as Mike just said, Kentucky, is going to be a vastly different area. So make sure you know your state rules, regulations, laws, your health systems, parameters and guidelines. But ultimately, these are just some things we're trying to do to protect you.
And that's very important to emphasize, Thomas, that, you should go to your nursing board association, your PA associations, your state nursing board website, your state, physician assistants or a licensing bureau website. And you should sign up for updates on rules and laws, because they don't make it a point to tell you guys the rules and the laws. They just expect you to know every single one of them. And most of the time, they're this thick, who reads those? I was probably the only, that's the truth. I was probably the only medical board investigator that ever sat down and read all the medical board rules from front to back, because I'm like, if I'm going to go out here and be an investigator, I want to know everything about it. That's what helped me, transition from, being an investigator to helping physicians, is because, I research and I look at everything. And a lot of doctors don't, a lot of PAs don't, a lot of MPs don't, because, they're too busy taking care of patients the way there should be.
Yeah. So we talked about documentation, and obviously I agree. Like, I'm telling the expert how to do his job, but I'm just saying, like, I would assume documentation would have been the number one. That's just pounded everywhere. And are there other big, huge pitfalls though that you see repeatedly and you're just like, how the hell does this keep happening besides documentation?
Yeah, it kind of all goes back to documentation, but diversion and aberrant behavior, what the government refers to as red flags with patients. There is such a lack of documentation with red flags, and, a lack of, not only addressing the red flag, but, developing a plan of action for the red flag, or, some type of discipline. And I'll give you an example. You get a patient in your office, elderly patient, husband and wife. The wife goes to Dr. John down the street. The husband comes to you. Okay. The husband is on hydrocodone. The wife's on oxycodone. And we're talking low dose here, 325, maybe twice a day. Okay. You do a drug test like, you're supposed to. You do a random drug test. And, these patients are going to be low risk, because, it's very low dose, and, unless they've had some type of aberrant behavior in the past, they're going to be low risk. So you're going to do about one a year, for a low risk patient. So you do a drug test, and he's showing small amounts of oxycodone in a system that his wife was prescribed. So you say, Mr. Smith, I've got your results for urine tests here. You were positive for oxycodone. And, he's, can you tell me, what happened or what's going on? And he says, well, Tom, I get up in the middle of the night sometime in really bad pain. I can't sleep. Me and my wife keep the medicine in the medicine cabinet, together. I guess it's possible I grabbed the wrong medication. I don't take it on purpose. I don't do anything. And obviously he's going to test positive for his medication too. So you say, okay, well, we have a controlled substance agreement, which is very important, with controlled substance prescribing, is to have an agreement, with your patient on the do's and don'ts. Always make sure those controlled substance agreements say may and not that you will. So, and what I'm saying is, don't write in there, you will discharge them if they test, have a bad urine result. Then you don't, then they're going to use that against you in a hearing. Okay. So you always want to use words like may, because that allows you to use your medical decision-making, which you should be able to do, because that's your education. You have to have good medical decision-making, and you have to be able to exercise that and not lock yourself down, on something, on an agreement. So first thing you're going to do with Mr. Smith, you're going to counsel him and on the controlled substance agreement that he signed this agreement, and that maybe they should separate their medications. He should have his locked up here, or at least move them to a different bathroom, et cetera, so this doesn't happen again. You're also going to counsel him that on the increased risk of overdose, because he's using 2 opiates now. You want to give him some warnings that, Mr. Smith, I've got to let you know that there's an increased risk of respiratory depression because you're using 2 opiates. I don't want any harm to come to you. So therefore, in the future, you need to be very careful, because, you could accidentally overdose yourself and realize it because you've already got hydrocodone in your system and you use oxycodone. Okay. you want to give them a Narcan for safety if you don't already. Honestly, if you prescribe a controlled substance, an opiate, everyone should get Narcan once a year.
Would you say, like, for the patients though that refuse it? Because I mean, that does happen when we say, hey, this is, so just document they refuse it. Is that suffice?
Best thing to do is, most of it's electronic prescribing now in most states, is go ahead and send the prescription to the pharmacy along with the opiate. Tell the patient what it is. Tell the patient when to use it, when not to do it. Mm-hmm. And if they have hesitations or they say, I'm not a drug addict, say, well, it's not just for you. What if, Lord forbid, someone got in your medication, a grandkid, a child next door, or you go outside and there's someone that overdosed on your sidewalk, and, you want to have this medication because it's life-saving. And it doesn't mean anything against you. It doesn't mean anything against the prescriber, for giving it out, but it's just good medicine, to make sure. And it could save a life, if not the patient, someone else's. So even if it's a low dose opiate, I always tell my prescribers to give out a Narcan every single time. And they should renew those Narcans yearly along with the controlled substance agreements, because the controlled substance agreements have to be re-signed yearly. Okay. So,
and one other thing, so we have our patients do all the stuff you were talking about. Mm-hmm. One of the questions I've had, and I've had people ask me, and I'm like, I don't know the answer. So is when we have that and it says you may be tested, urine drug screens, et cetera, my question becomes, is random okay? Or does every patient, like if I said, okay, every patient in June, you're going to pee a cup, obviously that defeats the purpose. Now they all know. So my question becomes is, like, let's say I go, okay, I'm going to pick randomly. I have 100 prescriptions for Oxy. Mm-hmm. I'm going to randomly pick 10 of these and have them pee the next time they come in the office. Is that sufficient? Or is the government really going to go, no, bro, every person that signs one better have a pee test? Like, which one am I going to be looking at?
Really can't win with the government.
I was to say, so I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't is what it looks like.
Because here's the thing, like the physicians that have their own labs, they, if they urine test and they say it's too much, you know what I mean? If they don't have their own labs, they'll say it's not enough, Yeah. But honestly, Kentucky has probably one of the best rules, laws, considerations for urine drug testing. And I use it as a model, in every state, because you have to urine drug test based on risk stratification and whether a patient's low, moderate, or high risk. Okay. But that determination, whether they're low, moderate, or high risk, you can either do by an opiate risk tool, like Lynn Webster has an opiate risk tool that, questionnaire they score. You can do something like formal like that, or you can go off the morphine equivalent dose. You could say, anything 30 and below is low risk. Anything 30 to 60 is moderate risk. Anything over 60 is high risk. Or if they're co-prescribed, an opiate with a benzo or an opiate with a sleeping pill, then they're
high risk. Yeah.
But you have to, no state, and the government doesn't either, has a formula for how you determine risk stratification. It's left up to the prescribers at their medical discretion. But just, it's like, you have to have this, but we're not going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it the right way, we're going to come after you.
I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but if you don't do it the way I'm imagining that I won't tell you about, I'm going to punish you for it.
Yeah, then you're a drug trafficker,
Yeah, exactly. Oops.
So it's very important that you come up with a risk stratification policy and just make it a policy, put it in writing that, that this person's low risk, this person's moderate, this person's high. So if they're low risk, you're going to do at least one urine drug test a year, more if they show signs of aberrant behavior, like they come in appearing intoxicated, or they say that they lost their medication, or, you get a phone call that the patient is selling their medication from a family member overusing, then obviously you want to do more than one a year on that patient. Yeah. Moderate risk, you're going to do at least 2 a year, and high risk, you're going to do 4 a year. Okay. And you're going to make sure that risk level is documented in the chart, because if they come in and they say, well, you're billing way too many urine drug screens. And you're like, well, this patient is on, 80 MEDs, which, anything over 60, I categorize as high risk just because, there's increased risk of overdose and safety and, and everything like that. Then I do 4 based on my policies, 4 at random. And that can be 4, 2 back to back, one in January, one in February, then another one in, October, another in December. But, that's up to you. But To me, it should be random unless the patient exhibits a sign of diversion or aberrant behavior. And then you want to do it right then and there.
Okay. And we've talked about documentation. We've talked about major pitfalls. Is there any other overwhelming things that you wish, with all your expertise in this area, that prescribing authorities or providers would know, heed, listen to your begging and pleading as this is your chance at a PSA to try and right some wrongs? So what is it? Is there anything we left out so far? Obviously, everything goes back to documentation, but outside of that.
I think outside of documentation, the biggest thing that I can say to prescribers is sometimes you have to listen to your medical knowledge and ignore your heart.
Thank you. Okay.
And I call it the devil angel scenario. Obviously the devil is the heart that's saying, oh, this is a good patient. I believe this patient, even though everything is telling you that this pain is not legitimate or that this patient doesn't need this, you listen to the devil, and the angel is your medical knowledge that you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to obtain, and it's based on science. It's telling you like, this doesn't make medical sense. Why are you giving them this controlled substance? And you ignore the angel for the devil. So my biggest advice is listen to your medical knowledge and do not listen to your heart, because that's how bad patients manipulate prescribers, because most prescribers get into this field to help people. Well, guess what? That leaves all their heartstrings exposed. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad trade or anything like that, but it allows, people that, and it's a very small patient population. I would probably say less than 5% are actual true manipulators, that are manipulating you to get the medication. Some people really need it, and most people really need it, honestly. But, listen to your medical knowledge. Don't allow them to take control of your heartstrings. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll talk you up as a prescriber. They'll say, you're the best. You're the best doc in the world. You're the best nurse practitioner in the world. You're the most handsome, you're the best looking doctor,
Oh, flattery will get you everywhere with me. Boy, oh boy.
Exactly. And that's what they do. And that's what they say. And it's scary. But, I gave a talk a while back to a large hospital group in Cincinnati, back when I was still with the state. I told him, I said, listen, when I would go into a bad doctor's office and, he would say, you're the nicest investigator I've ever had, or, wow, you're really nice dressed. You're really good looking. And I said, I knew he was guilty. I just knew it.
He's trying to throw me off the set.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just stick to your medical judgment, obviously have compassion, have empathy. But ultimately, if you're having a conflict in your brain between your heart and your medical judgment, go with your medical judgment.
And unfortunately, this is an area where I think a lot of people, especially the nurse practitioners, fall into this because they came from nursing, they came from bedside, where it's ground into our head. You do everything to help these people. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Absolutely. I'm just saying I also, as longtime listeners know, I have my law enforcement background, and I came into this profession a little more cynical and jaded than apparently most. And so somebody could be like, oh, you got really big muscles. I'm like, okay. I don't know what you want, but you're not getting it. Like automatically the door shuts down. Clank. Like, no, okay. So we've talked about a lot.
Let me give you some naproxen.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can only take stuff that starts with a D. I'm like, oh, it must be discharge. So that's what you're getting. So
that's great.
Yeah.
But Tom, most nurse practitioners and doctors don't come from the background like me and you came from. And it's sad because a lot of them are just naive. And, I've helped a lot of practitioners over the years kind of open their eyes. And I opened their eyes not prescribe, but just to more safely prescribe.
Well, and that's why Ben and I were really glad to have you on the show, is because, first of all, this is something we have to do. This is part of our lives. We want to do it. We want to help people. And like you said, I have family members that are on pain medication.
Absolutely.
I understand the necessity. And as much as I hate people being on long-term chronic pain meds, because see the side effects, the long-term side effects, it's nothing, but I don't want them in pain. So I'm in this weird position of, I want to help you, but I'm in this position where I know what I'm doing to help you.
Right.
There's all these rules. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want you to get in trouble. And so that's why it was so important. And we were so glad to have you on the show.
In every state, make sure every visit you're checking the PDMPs. Whether in Ohio that's ORS or Kentucky that's Casper or Michigan that's MAPS. You should be checking that reports, and you can have delegates in pretty much every state. You can have an MA be your delegate as long as you trust them and know they're not going to run their coworkers or run a celebrity through there. But, and it's sad but true. But, a lot of people don't know it's a felony. If you're not, in most states, it's a felony. And it's also a HIPAA violation. So, you definitely want to run the PDMP and document that in the chart. And one thing you have to do is you just can't just run the PDMP reports. You have to document in the chart whether they're compliant or not. It can be a simple checkbox, in your EMR that you create that just says, PDMP was reviewed, compliant, non-compliant. And if it's non-compliant, then you have a little couple lines that you can type a note in.
So I guess I do have a question because I'm a big PDMP checker. I make a little note, we have a timestamp button. So I hit timestamp, I put PDMP checked. Is that sufficient or
checked is not sufficient because that doesn't show that you reviewed it. That just says that you allegedly looked at it. It's it's a very vague generic statement that it was checked because, but if you write in there what was on that PDMP, whether it was compliant or non-compliant, then they know for sure you checked it.
Okay, so if I put in there the last time they filled it was 26 days ago, so I went ahead and filled it with do not fill before this date. So then they can track, he saw exactly when the last time it was filled and when that's sufficient or not sufficient. Yeah,
that's more than sufficient. Okay, and that really shows that you're serious about, safe, compliant prescribing, which really, when experts, for the government, whether it's a medical board review or malpractice review or whatever, when they see stuff like that, they know they're dealing with a professional and they know that person's not a drug trafficker, that person's trying to take care of their patients and doing the right thing.
Well, so, even I just learned something because what have I been putting? PDMP checked. I just assumed that when I clicked that, there was some kind of electronic footprint clearly he clicked on this button at 1848 hours.
Well, the thing is, it can be argued in court that, because, a lot of PDMPs are intermingled with the EMR where you can get in the EMR, just click.
Yeah, that's how mine is. So
and it can be argued that you opened it, but there's nothing that says you read it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and that's the issue. The other thing, you're in drug testing. Make sure that you're putting in the chart that you're ordering the test. That's a Medicare requirement that that you are ordering this test. Some people, and we've seen it lately, where people have gotten in trouble for just having their MAs order the tests, come up with a random section, but you have to, like any other diagnostic test that prescriber or practitioner orders, you need to put in a chart that you ordered this test, so they know that it was a medical decision that you ordered this test.
Okay. Well, sir, if we've covered everything, is there any information about looking you up, contacting you if they want to get a hold of you for your services? Is there any social media you want to talk about?
Absolutely. ghealthcare.com is our website. We're affiliated with the Chapman Law Group, which is, one of the best healthcare legal firms, in the country. Mr. Ron Chapman II, very, very involved in the recent Supreme Court decisions, Ruan, and which basically made it a little bit harder for the government to come after you for drug trafficking when you had no criminal intent to drug traffic. You're just trying to help patients, which is probably about 99.9% of the people that we deal are good, honest prescribers, good, honest practitioners that were trying to do the right thing for their patients. If anything they did wrong, it was just being a little naive, which is not a crime and shouldn't be a crime. Because, trying to help somebody out, should never be a crime, and especially in the United States of America.
100%. No. Just like I was just talking about, I thought I was doing my due diligence. I was putting I checked, but just to come to find out that there is an electronic footprint. So that was my naive. So it's 100%. But that's why we do shows like this is hopefully the people out there are going to learn something. So,
what we do real quick, Tom, is we do a front to back door inspection. If I'm not there helping, the attorneys build your defense case, if you're not actually in trouble. And I actually recommend more so doing this before you get into trouble. Unfortunately, a lot of our clients, call after they get into trouble and then they're like, well, I need a compliance plan. I need this. And it still helps. Don't get me wrong. There's a Department of Justice memo out there that says even if you put a compliance plan in place after you get in trouble, they still have to give you the points. They still have to give you the credit for doing that because you're trying to do the right thing.
You're trying to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it helps regardless. But, if you're going to prescribe controlled substances and help patients, then you need to have this stuff in place prior to getting in trouble, prior to the government looking at it. You need to have a compliance plan in place. You need to have the right documentation, the right controlled substance agreement, the right checks and balances as far as diversion and aberrant behavior. You need to have all this stuff in place prior to the government coming in. And that's something that we specialize in. We go in and do a front to back door inspection of the practice. We look at everything, so we'll look at, charts, we'll look at documentation, we'll train staff on identifying aberrant behavior and diversion and also documentation. We can set up a compliance plan. We can train the staff on what a compliance plan entails. We can help write a compliance manual for the practice and even tell you, how to conduct compliance meetings and compliance investigations, et cetera. We even do things as, where we contract with businesses for me to be their compliance officer. There's several practices right now that contract with me to be their compliance officer. So anytime a compliance complaint comes in, it comes directly to me and I investigate it. That way they have nothing, no prejudice, no favorites, no nothing. And that's a little above and beyond, but for people that's trying to obviously do the right thing and people in high risk categories like, pain management,
for sure.
Addiction treatment, Suboxone, things like that. Sometimes you have to have that extra safeguards, unfortunately.
I would say if you have an X waiver, I would definitely be recommending, if you have an X waiver and you're using it consistently, you had better be dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. So for sure. I do thank you for your time. We're going to go ahead and get off here for the night, but do not be shocked if we have you back for a round 2 when Ben is finally let out of the closet. He may have some questions to ask, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback from a healthcare provider. So don't be surprised in a couple of months if we're not like, hey, you want to pop on the show again.
Hey, I'll be happy to. I'm always happy to help the people that help us.
Practice swearing just to pass the time. Lately I see why I am alone. I caught some road rage and I thought of you and all the many times